pay taxes. So correctional services will continue to work with our various partners to strengthen our farming operations, which promote offender rehabilitation and safer communities for all Canadians to enjoy. Thank you, Speaker.
The honourable member for Kitchener Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm back tonight to continue calling on this government to get serious about the climate crisis, specifically with respect to investing in public transit, which they could do by taxing the excess profits being made by the oil and gas industry. This is particularly timely because this very specific call could be included in this government's fall economic statement whenever that comes out over the coming weeks. And it's one of the reasons why this is one of 6 calls I've been making to the Minister of Finance over the last number of weeks. The stakes, in my view, really couldn't be higher when it comes to the climate crisis that we are in. First of all, recognizing we are the only G7 country whose emissions have gone up since 1990. It's at a time when we've already reached about 1.3 degrees Celsius of warming compared to pre-industrial times. Back at the 2015 Paris Climate Conference, at that time, world leaders all agreed we would do everything possible to limit to 1.5 degrees Celsius. They did this because climate scientists have told us if we cross that threshold, their words, leading to devastating and potentially irreversible consequences for several vital Earth systems that sustain a hospitable planet. And yet, what are we on track for? As of now, current pledges by countries around the world put us somewhere between 2.6 and 3.1 degrees of global average temperature rise. We must do so much more as a country to do our fair share, to lead, to demonstrate what's possible when it comes to acting on the climate crisis. Yet at the same time, when it comes to proven climate solutions like public transit, well, there's no new funding till 2026. That's after the next election. The funding that is being made available, it's any operations like a mechanic who needs to fix a bus, that's not eligible either, and the funding being provided is pretty much the status quo. At the same time, for proven climate distractions like carbon capture and storage, well, let's roll out the red carpet. This government is giving another tax credit in Bill C-59. That's between $7 to $16 billion. Most of the Canada Growth Fund, $15 billion there. You want to expand a pipeline? Oh, we got $34 billion for you to do that. Meanwhile, the oil and gas industry, well, they're making off like bandits. In 2022 alone, the 5 biggest oil and gas companies operating in this country, they made $38 billion, and that's after the $29 billion of dividends and share repurchases. And they're doing it by gouging Canadians at the pumps to the tune of 18 cents a litre. The solution should be pretty obvious. Number 1, stop the subsidies. Number 2, tax these excess profits by taking the Canada Recovery Dividend that was applied to banks and life insurance companies in the pandemic and applying it to oil and gas, even just 15% of profits over $1 billion. That would generate $4.2 billion a year, all of which could be put into proven solutions like public transit where they could add more funds, they could start this fund sooner, and they could direct it towards operating funds. My question to the Parliamentary Secretary is, will they do it?
Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. It's nice to be here for a German debate with my friend and colleague from the Green Party in Kitchener Centre to discuss how we fight climate change, not just if we fight climate change, which is the conversation that we always have with the Conservative Party because they want to ignore the impacts of climate change. I'll just say I was a little bit, struck by the fact that my friend didn't mention that Canada is the first oil and gas producing nation to introduce an emissions cap on the oil and gas sector. Madam Chair, this is an essential next step, and yet we've got Premier Danielle Smith spending $7 million of public money. That's money that could have been invested to hire new nurses and teachers in the province of Alberta. Instead, she's actually doing equalization. She's hired a Quebec company to drive trucks around Ottawa with big screens on them that say "scrap the cap." Well, we won't scrap the cap because we believe in climate action. We believe that oil and gas companies, while essential, we need the energy, the world needs Canadian energy, but they shouldn't be entitled to unlimited pollution, Madam Chair, and that's why we've stepped up to say, okay guys, you need to invest some of your $66 billion in profits last year into some climate action, into some efficiencies, and making sure that we don't have emissions-intensive barrels of oil. But I'd also like to congratulate the region of Waterloo and certainly the residents of Kitchener Centre, because they've been the recipients of an extraordinary amount of public transit funding over the last couple of years, and that's due in part to amazing advocacy from my friends and colleagues here from that region. And I've got a couple of quotes to read. The first is from Mayor Barry Verbanovich, who I've met a couple of times, is a very nice guy. He says, "There is now a stable source of funds to help pay for the extension of the light rail system from Kitchener into Cambridge. It is absolutely transformative," said His Worship Mayor Verbanovich. He was referring to the $30 billion investment that we just recently made into public transit. It's the largest ever investment that the federal government has ever made into public transit in Canada. That's extraordinary. But I've also got to congratulate them on being early winners in the public transit game. My colleague said there was no funding available until 2026. That's not true. They were recently awarded over $187 million through a $180 billion fund for public transit, green infrastructure, and more social activities and infrastructure in various communities. So we are funding the public transit system that the residents of Kitchener Centre need and use regularly, and like my colleague said, that reduces greenhouse gas emissions, reduces people's reliance on cars, and that's a good thing. And people will say, but don't buses run on diesel? Sometimes, but not the 11 fully electric vehicles that the federal government purchased for the Grand River Transit System with $6 million through our public transit infrastructure stream. Madam Chair, Waterloo Region is extremely well served by our plethora of public transit funding. And I have another quote here to read. It's from an article, actually from the website of the region of Waterloo. They said that GRT is in collaboration with the cities of Cambridge, Kitchener, and Waterloo, and thanks to $5 million in total federal and municipal project funding through Canada's Public Transit Infrastructure Fund, they are deploying 11 fully electric buses, which is fun. It's great. It's so good for, I'm an electric vehicle enthusiast. I love seeing vehicles on the road that don't need to rely on fossil fuels. And I have a quote here. Quote starts, "Investing in modern and integrated networks of multi-use trails and pathways that connect to public transit are essential to building healthy and sustainable communities from all Canadians to live, work, and raise their families." That is from one of my favorite members of Parliament, the Honourable Member of Parliament for Waterloo. We've worked together a lot, so I want to congratulate her on the funding for her region and thank her for her advocacy.
Bravo. The Honour for Kitchener Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. What the Parliamentary Secretary is quite right on is this government has made investments. In fact, I was at the announcement with respect to the electric buses that he mentioned. But what he needs to also realize is that advocates have been trying to tell this government that if they don't ensure that the funding they've proposed also funds operations, we are not going to see the advances we need to increase service and reduce fares. Because the Permanent Public Transit Fund that doesn't start till 2026, this is the voice of environmental defense, for example. A lack of public transit operating funding means buses don't show up on time, riders spend more time waiting, and fares continue to climb faster than inflation. And so my question for the Parliamentary Secretary is, will he recognize what transit advocates have been calling for to ensure that we roll out the red carpet the way his government has already for carbon capture, where they've given tens of billions for climate distractions, and put that towards the public transit that we need?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Chair, I think these are really important issues, but I honestly think that my friend and colleague is conflating two issues. We're taking strong climate action and we're holding big oil and gas companies to account. All of those big profits that I mentioned that he referenced as well, they are taxed and they are funding these programs. And it's important to recognize that, we do travel on modes of transportation that require fossil fuels, and the world needs Canada's energy, and we've got to make sure that it's green, clean, innovative, and efficient, Madam Chair. And that's what we're doing with the cap on emissions, the first ever that, again, I'm surprised my friend and colleague refuses to acknowledge that this government has taken really, really strong action. But we talked earlier today, and I mentioned to him that the city of Burlington, which is a small part of the riding of Milton, not geographically, just from the perspective of population, has made transit free for seniors, transit free for kids under 12, transit is free for teens, and they've done that with help from our government, with support for these initiatives, and I know that the region of Waterloo has that same support. So I congratulate them, and again, thank the member for his advocacy.
La motion portant